I want you to understand something about who you were back then. You weren't foolish. You weren't blind. You were hopeful in a way that felt honest. You were standing inside a life that finally made sense. And for once, you let yourself believe it would last. You had a name for yourself in that world. You were the man who had found his person. The man who didn't hesitate when he said, "My fiancée." You said it with pride, not possession, but certainty. Years together had built that confidence. Late nights, shared routines, inside jokes that didn't need explaining. You trusted her the way you trust the ground under your feet. Not because you tested it every day, but because it had never failed you before. You loved her quietly, but deeply. Not in grand speeches, but in consistency. In showing up. In planning a future that felt solid. Wedding dates, guest lists, colors, venues. All of it wasn't just an event to you. It was proof that this life was moving forward. That you had done something right. You imagined mornings together, arguments you'd survive, problems you'd solve as a team. You imagined loyalty as something that came naturally when love was real. And that was your weakness, even if it didn't feel like one at the time. You believed loyalty was automatic. You believed love made certain lines impossible to cross. You didn't think you had to guard your heart because you thought it was already safe. Her friends were always around. Loud, playful, protective, or at least that's what you told yourself. They laughed hard, spoke freely, teased you like you were already family. You never questioned them. You thought their closeness meant she was surrounded by people who wanted the best for her, for both of you. You didn't see warning signs because you weren't looking for enemies in a room you believed was friendly. Your sibling noticed things you brushed off. A tone, a look, a joke that landed a little too sharp. But you defended everyone without realizing it. You didn't want cracks in the picture you had worked so hard to build. So you ignored the small discomforts. You told yourself you were overthinking. You told yourself trust meant silence. Then the Bachelorette party came up. Just a conversation at first. Casual, harmless. Music, drinks, laughter, one last night of freedom. That's what everyone called it. You nodded along. You smiled. You said the right things because that's what a secure man does. But something tightened in your chest. Not fear, not suspicion, just a strange pressure you couldn't name. A feeling that didn't belong anywhere else in your life. You noticed it, and then you did what you'd always done. You ignored it. You told yourself love doesn't ask questions like that. You told yourself trust doesn't flinch. You didn't know yet that this was the last quiet moment before everything changed. You didn't know that the people you never doubted would become the source of your deepest humiliation. You didn't know that the life you were so proud of was already beginning to slip through your hands. All you knew was that you loved her, and you believed that was enough. That night, you stayed home. Not because you weren't invited, not because you were unwanted, but because you were confident. You told yourself this was what trust looked like. Calm, quiet, unquestioning. You remember the room. The way the lights felt too bright for how empty the house sounded. You sat with your phone nearby, not glued to it, just close enough to remind yourself that everything was fine. Where a first message came in, you smiled. A normal smile. An honest one. You read it twice, not because it meant something special, but because it reassured you. She was having fun. She was safe. She was still yours. You felt proud of yourself that night. Proud that you weren't the kind of man who checked locations or asked too many questions. Proud that you trusted her without needing proof. You told yourself insecure men spy. Secure men wait. And you believed you were secure. Time passed differently that night. Minutes stretched, then disappeared. You distracted yourself with small things. TV playing in the background, a half-finished task you didn't care about. Every now and then, you checked your phone again. Not nervously. Casually, like someone with nothing to fear. The replies started coming slower. Nothing obvious. Nothing dramatic. Just a little delayed. A little shorter. You noticed it, but you didn't name it. You didn't want to. You told yourself she was busy, laughing, dancing, surrounded by noise. You reminded yourself that trust means you don't demand attention when someone else is living their life. One message made you pause longer than the others. The words were fine, but the tone felt careless, like it was written in a rush, like you were an afterthought instead of the center of her world. The way she used to make you feel. You stared at the screen, feeling something small twist in your chest. And then you corrected yourself. You told yourself this is what mature love looks like. You told yourself you were reading too much into nothing. You didn't want to be the man who ruins a moment with doubt. So you swallowed it. You replied kindly. You kept your voice steady, even in text. You kept telling yourself that silence was strength. That asking questions would only reveal insecurity. That love, real love, didn't need constant reassurance. You had built your identity around being calm, understanding, unshaken. That night, you protected that identity at the cost of your instincts. As the hours went on, your phone stayed face up beside you. Each vibration still gave you a small lift, and then a quiet disappointment when it wasn't from her. You laughed at yourself for even noticing. You reminded yourself that you were lucky, engaged, chosen. You told yourself this was just one night, meaningless in the long story you were writing together. Eventually, the messages stopped. Not abruptly, just faded. You looked at the time and decided not to look again. You didn't want to seem needy, even to yourself. You placed the phone down and leaned back, convincing your body to relax. When you finally lay in bed, the house felt heavier, quieter. Your mind replayed the evening in fragments. Her smile before she left, the way she kissed you goodbye, the promise that she'd call when she got home. You held on to those memories like evidence, like proof that everything was still intact. You fell asleep believing you had done the right thing, believing trust had made you noble, believing love had protected you. You didn't know that while you were choosing silence, your life was being rewritten without your permission. You didn't know that the man you would wake up as no longer lived in the world you trusted. That night, you slept peacefully, and that was the cruelest part of all. You didn't find out the way people warn you about. There was no dramatic confrontation, no confession delivered with tears. The truth didn't arrive politely. It slammed into you by accident, like walking into a room you were never meant to enter. At first, your body knew before your mind did. Your hands went cold, not numb, cold like the blood had pulled back suddenly. Your mouth dried so fast you tried to swallow and couldn't. Your ears started ringing, a high, thin sound that made the world feel far away. You remember thinking something was wrong with you, not with her, that maybe you were getting sick. Then you heard it, or read it, or pieced it together from words that were never meant to reach you. A voice on the phone that wasn't careful enough. A message preview that stayed on the screen 1 second too long. Laughter leaking through a door. It doesn't matter how it happened, only that it did. And once it did, there was no way to put the meaning back where it came from. She slept with a stranger. The sentence landed whole. No confusion. No room to reinterpret it. Just a clean, brutal fact. A man you had never met. A night you stayed home. A body that wasn't yours touching someone you were planning to marry. Your legs felt weak, like the floor had softened. Your heart started beating too fast, then too slow, then too loud. Every sound in the room became sharp. Every detail burned itself into your memory because your mind was trying to survive the moment by recording it. And then it got worse because you didn't just learn what she did. You heard how they talked about it. Her friends weren't quiet. They weren't ashamed. They laughed. Real laughter. Loose. Carefree. The kind of laughter people use when nothing feels serious to them. One of them joked about the stranger like he was a punchline. Another mocked how easy it was. Someone said your name, casually, and laughed harder. You remember fragments of their voices. He doesn't even know. She deserved one last night. He's so trusting. Each word felt like a slap. Not because they were clever, but because they were careless. They spoke about you like you weren't human. Like you were an object sitting outside the room, irrelevant to the story they were enjoying. Your chest tightened until it hurt to breathe. Not dramatic pain, pressure, like something heavy was sitting on your lungs. You wanted to interrupt them. You wanted to scream. You wanted to disappear. All at the same time, you realized something terrifying in that moment. This wasn't just betrayal. This was humiliation. She didn't just cross a line. She crossed it in a room full of people who didn't stop her. People who encouraged it. People who saw you as a joke, a background character in a story they felt entitled to rewrite. The stranger became real in your head. Not his face, just the idea of him. His hands. His presence where you were supposed to be. The thought made your stomach turn. You felt dirty even though you hadn't done anything wrong. You replayed the night over and over. You sitting at home. You smiling at messages. You telling yourself trust meant silence. Every memory twisted into something ugly. Every kind thought you'd had about her now felt naive. Embarrassing. And the laughter stayed with you the most. Not her voice, because that's when the final piece fell into place. Slowly, clearly, painfully. This wasn't an accident. This wasn't a moment of weakness surrounded by regret. This was something they felt comfortable doing around you. Something they never feared you finding out about. Your hands stopped shaking eventually, but the damage was already done. Something fundamental inside you cracked. Not your heart, your understanding. Your sense of where you stood in the world you thought you belonged to. One thought started looping in your head, over and over, louder than everything else. They never respected you. Not your love. Not your loyalty. Not your presence in her life. And once you understood that, nothing could ever go back to the way it was. You didn't walk into that conversation ready to fight. That's the part people never understand. You didn't come with rage in your chest or revenge in your voice. You came with confusion, with questions you never thought you'd have to ask the woman you were ready to marry. You looked at her like she could still explain it away. Like maybe there was a version of the truth that wouldn't destroy you. Your voice wasn't sharp. It shook, not from fear, but from disbelief. You asked how it happened, why it happened, what she was thinking. You were still trying to save something, dignity, meaning, maybe even her. She didn't meet you where you were. She sighed. That sound alone felt like an insult. Like your pain was inconvenient. She told you it didn't mean anything. She said it was just one night, one mistake, as if reducing it would somehow make it lighter for you to carry. She spoke calmly, almost rehearsed, like she had already decided how serious this was allowed to be. And then her friends stepped in. They didn't stand behind her quietly. They spoke for her, over you, around you. One of them rolled her eyes when you tried to explain how it felt. Another laughed under her breath, not loud enough to deny later, but loud enough for you to hear. They framed it like you were overreacting, like you were fragile, like you were the problem in the room. Someone said you were controlling for being hurt. Someone said men do worse all the time. Someone said if you were more confident, this wouldn't bother you so much. You stood there, surrounded, and felt yourself shrink. Your chest burned, but not with anger, with shame. You started questioning your words as you spoke them. You wondered if you sounded weak, if your pain sounded small compared to how easily they dismissed it. You felt outnumbered, not just physically, but emotionally. Like the rules had changed and no one told you. Inside your head, the darkness crept in. You asked yourself if this was your fault. If you were too trusting, too soft, too certain. You questioned your masculinity in a way that made your stomach twist. You wondered if real men just swallow this kind of thing. If walking away hurt more than staying silent. If you were being laughed at because you deserved it. And through it all, she let it happen. She didn't stop them. She didn't defend you. She didn't say your pain mattered. She stood there, arms crossed, or eyes down, letting the room turn against you. That was the moment something snapped inside you. Quietly, completely. You realized then that the sex wasn't the deepest cut. It was the laughter. The way they spoke about you like you weren't there. The way she allowed you to be reduced, minimized, rewritten as disposable. You weren't her partner in that room. You were an inconvenience. A problem to manage. A man whose loyalty had become something to mock rather than protect. Your heart felt heavy, but your ego felt crushed. Not wounded, shattered. You saw yourself through their eyes for a second, and it made you feel smaller than you ever had. Like your love had been cheap. Like your commitment had been a joke they all shared. Mid-sentence, you stopped talking. Not because you ran out of words, but because you finally understood they wouldn't hear them. You looked at her one last time, hoping for something. Anything. Remorse. Accountability. Respect. You didn't find it. So you turned around. You walked away while they were still talking. Still defending. Still explaining why your pain was unreasonable. Each step felt heavy, like you were dragging the remains of a future behind you. Your chest ached. Your hands trembled. Your throat closed as soon as you were alone. You didn't feel strong walking away. You felt broken, exposed, humiliated. But somewhere beneath the heartbreak, beneath the ruined pride, a quiet truth followed you out the door. The realization that staying would have destroyed you even more. And even though you didn't know it yet, that walk was the first time you chose yourself over being laughed at. This is the part no one sees. The part where there's no argument left, no enemy in front of you, just silence and the sound of your own thoughts turning against you. You didn't fall apart loudly. You did it behind closed doors, in the dark. In short, broken hours of sleep that barely counted as rest. You lay awake replaying sentences you never wanted to hear, laughter you couldn't shut off, moments you wished you had handled differently. Your body was exhausted, but your mind refused to stop punishing you. Anger came and went, but shame stayed. Shame for trusting. Shame for not seeing it sooner. Shame for still missing someone who had humiliated you. You stare at the ceiling night after night, asking yourself how you could love someone and feel this small at the same time. You imagine conversations that would never happen. You rewrote moments in your head, convincing yourself that if you had spoken differently, acted stronger, been less calm, maybe none of this would have happened. You stopped answering messages. You avoided familiar places. Not because you didn't want company, but because you didn't know how to explain the truth without feeling exposed. Saying the wedding was off felt heavier than saying someone had died. At least grief makes sense to people. Betrayal makes them curious. Some people showed up quietly. They didn't say much. They sat with you, let you be empty, didn't rush you to heal. Those moments mattered more than they knew. Others made it worse without realizing it. They told you to forgive. They told you to move on. They told you everyone makes mistakes. Each time, it felt like being betrayed all over again. Like your pain was inconvenient. Like you were expected to be noble about something that had broken you. You nodded along, but inside, something hardened. You realized how lonely this kind of hurt really is. In the silence, patterns started to surface. You saw how often you had ignored discomfort just to keep the peace. How many times you had talked yourself out of your own instincts because you didn't want conflict. You remembered moments that felt wrong at the time, jokes that crossed lines, behaviors you excused, boundaries you softened because love felt easier that way. You weren't weak, but you were willing to disappear a little to keep things smooth. That realization hurt more than the betrayal itself. You started questioning everything about yourself. Your judgment, your worth, your identity as a man. You wondered if you were respected by anyone, or if respect was something you had quietly given away over time. Some nights, the loneliness felt unbearable. Not because you were alone, but because you felt replaceable. Like the version of you who loved deeply was something people could use without consequence. And still, part of you considered staying. Not because you believed it could be fixed, but because leaving felt like admitting failure. Because walking away meant accepting that the future you planned was gone. Because starting over felt terrifying when you already felt so small. That's when the question finally formed. Not softly, not gently. It came with weight. If you stay, if you accept this laughter, this disrespect, this rewriting of your worth, what does that say about you? Not about her, not about her friends, about you. The question sat with you, heavy and unavoidable. It didn't ask what you loved. It asked what you were willing to tolerate. It didn't ask how much pain you could endure. It asked how little you believed you deserved. That night, staring into the dark, you didn't have an answer yet. But for the first time since everything collapsed, you stopped blaming yourself for feeling broken and started wondering whether staying broken was a choice you were still making. You finally realized that some questions don't need answers. Not why she did it. Not why her friends laughed. Not why the life you imagined unraveled so quickly. You stopped asking. You stopped trying to justify your pain to people who didn't care to see it. And in that silence, something shifted. Distance became your ally. Not a dramatic departure. Not a scene meant to shock or shame. Just space. Quiet space where your thoughts weren't invaded by their laughter, by their excuses, by the echoes of someone else's choices. You stopped explaining yourself, because the truth didn't require anyone else's approval. You didn't need their understanding. You didn't need their recognition. You deleted the channels through which they mocked you. Blocked the people who had turned your trust into a punchline. Every tap of the screen felt like a weight lifting like reclaiming pieces of yourself they had held hostage without knowing it. It wasn't revenge. It wasn't spectacle. It was dignity. You canceled the wedding quietly. No arguments. No announcements. No explanations that would invite pity or disbelief. You didn't have to justify yourself to the world. You only had to preserve your own sense of worth. The paper invitations, the flowers, the dates, all of it erased without drama, leaving only the memory of what could have been and the freedom to move forward. Your inner voice, the one that had been drowned by shock, shame, and anger, began to rise again. Not loud or flashy, calm, precise, and undeniably strong. It reminded you that your value wasn't measured by her actions, her regrets, or the opinions of people who didn't see you. It reminded you that self-respect doesn't depend on forgiveness or closure from someone who never earned it. You realized you didn't need her remorse to heal. You didn't need her recognition to validate your pain. The power to recover had always been yours, buried under disbelief, humiliation, and too many nights replaying words that didn't deserve to occupy your mind. And then the first signs appeared, subtle at first, almost imperceptible, like a soft wind before a storm. Her friends, the ones who had laughed at you, began to turn on each other. Lies started surfacing. Contradictions slipped through conversations. Whispers replaced laughter. The same people who once made you feel small were now exposed to the consequences of their own careless cruelty. You didn't celebrate. You didn't gloat. You simply noticed. The world, it seemed, had a way of balancing itself when you stepped aside from the chaos. Karma, quiet and inevitable, began to take root, and you were no longer in the path of its destruction. That night, you felt something unfamiliar. Calm, strength. Not the reckless, untested kind, but the kind that comes from standing up for yourself when no one else would. You felt your boundaries solidify. Your self-respect, long ignored and undervalued, began to shine. You understood, then, that healing doesn't require vengeance. It doesn't require confrontation. It requires choice. The choice to remove yourself from disrespect, to reclaim your dignity, and to trust your own judgment above all else. And somewhere in the background, you could sense it, the ripple you had started by stepping away quietly, by choosing yourself, was already beginning to change the world around you. The people who had humiliated you were starting to face the mirror they never wanted to look into. And for the first time, you weren't part of their story anymore. Time doesn't rush, but it doesn't pause either. Days stretch into weeks, weeks into months, and you watch the world move without you being pulled back into the storm. You hear fragments at first, casual mentions from mutual acquaintances, snippets of gossip that somehow find their way to you. The stranger, the one who had been at the center of the betrayal, vanishes completely. No messages, no explanations, no trace, just gone, leaving a hollow echo where chaos once threatened to swallow you. Her friends start to crumble. Slowly, almost painfully, you hear how the same people who laughed at your pain begin turning on each other. Lies they told to cover themselves spill out. Betrayals you didn't witness firsthand become common knowledge. You don't smile. You don't laugh. You barely register their downfall the way someone might read a headline. Instead, you feel the quiet, undeniable clarity of distance. She reaches out. That's the moment that used to terrify you. The call, the message, the tentative attempt to reconnect. You don't rush. You don't throw yourself into explanations or confrontations. You don't need to. That urge to respond immediately, the one that would have once come from hope or lingering attachment, is gone. You wait. You observe. And the clarity you feel isn't cold. It's simply unshakable. You think back to nights when anger burned in your chest. Nights when you imagined revenge. Imagine making her feel what she made you feel. Nights when every cell in your body demanded justice on your terms. You realize now how small that desire seems compared to what actually happened. Revenge, you understand, would have been a distraction, a temporary relief that wouldn't have healed you. Watching from the outside, you see that life doesn't require your interference to balance itself. The consequences came, slow and inevitable, and they were enough. You don't need to hold grudges, orchestrate payback, or let bitterness take root in your mind. You just need to let people face the reality of their choices while you continue to build your own life. It's not joy. It's not pleasure. There's no gloating in the fact that her reputation falters or that the people who mock you are no longer untouchable. There's just understanding. The understanding that the universe, or life, or karma, or whatever you want to call it, moves in its own way. And it doesn't require your participation. You notice how much lighter it feels to let go of the rage, to observe rather than act, to accept that your worth wasn't defined by what they did or didn't do. You feel a quiet strength growing inside you, the kind that comes from surviving, from choosing dignity over retaliation, from refusing to let humiliation dictate your life. In those moments, you also realize how much energy you wasted, how long you clung to the idea that you needed to fix everything yourself, how much of yourself you gave to anger, imagining it would make you whole. And now, with the passing of time, you see how unnecessary it all was. The world had its own course. You didn't need to manipulate it, force it, or even wish ill upon anyone. And for the first time since everything fell apart, you feel something resembling peace. Not light or carefree peace, but a grounded, unwavering clarity. The knowledge that you survived without losing yourself, that you kept your dignity, that you chose yourself when it mattered most. You didn't get revenge. You didn't need to. Karma worked, life moved, and you walked away unshaken, carrying only the strength you earned, not the bitterness you could have inflicted. It's enough. It is more than enough. You didn't wake up one morning fully healed. There was no sudden shift, no lightning strike that erased the months of pain. What changed was quieter, slower, a series of choices, small but deliberate, that added up until you could finally see yourself again, clearly, fully, without the shadow of betrayal clouding every thought. The first thing you rebuilt was your mind. Not your memories, not the anger, not the what-ifs, but your inner narrative. You stopped replaying moments to punish yourself. You stopped letting humiliation define who you were. You reminded yourself that your worth had never depended on someone else's respect or lack of it. Slowly, deliberately, you reclaimed the way you thought about yourself. Then came boundaries. You learned to draw lines that couldn't be crossed, not just with lovers, but with friends, colleagues, family, everyone who might take more than you were willing to give. This wasn't about building walls. It was about recognizing that respect isn't optional and that protecting your dignity isn't selfish. Every time you said no to something that felt wrong, you felt a quiet pulse of pride. Every time you walked away from people or situations that didn't honor you, you felt your backbone grow stronger. Standards followed naturally. You stopped settling for half-hearted love, half-truths, casual disregard. You stopped believing that compromise meant losing yourself. You learned to trust slower, not because you fear betrayal, but because you valued yourself enough to insist on care and respect. The people who once shaped your confidence with laughter and deceit no longer held sway over you. You had become your own measure. And the strangest thing happened. That betrayal, the one you once thought would destroy you, became a catalyst. It forced you to grow up faster than you expected. Not bitterly, not in reaction, but with clarity. You stopped seeing yourself as the guy who got cheated on. That label no longer fit. You didn't define yourself by what was done to you. You defined yourself by what you chose to do afterward. You became the man who could walk away from humiliation without apology. The man who could survive heartbreak without losing self-respect. The man who could feel deeply and love fully without surrendering his worth. You became someone who recognized that pain is part of life, but letting it erode you is optional. You became the person you would have respected before all of this happened. Every decision since has been measured, deliberate. You choose carefully who enters your life, who deserves your energy, who earns your trust. You no longer chase validation. You no longer need it. The voice inside that once trembled with doubt now speaks steadily, calmly, insisting that you are enough, that you always were, that nothing outside can change the value of your own being. And there's freedom in that. Freedom from anger. Freedom from shame. Freedom from defining yourself through someone else's mistakes. You are no longer a victim, no longer a character in someone else's story. You are the author of your own life. The man you were before the betrayal would never have believed this strength could exist inside you. But the man you became, the man who walked away, who chose dignity over despair, who rebuilt himself piece by piece, knows exactly how powerful he is. It's not about winning or losing anymore. It's about understanding your worth, living by it, and refusing to allow anyone to diminish it again. You carry that quietly, steadily, without needing anyone to notice. You are stronger. You are wiser. You are enough. And you will never forget what you learned because it made you whole. You look back and barely recognize him. The man from chapter 1. The one who believed loyalty was automatic. The one who thought love alone could shield him. The one who smiled at messages and ignored that strange tightening in his chest. He feels like someone else entirely. You don't hate him. You pity him a little. You wish you could tell him what you know now. That pain isn't the enemy, and dignity is always worth protecting. You don't hate her anymore. Not in the way anger once demanded you should. The hatred that burned in your chest after discovery and humiliation has faded into understanding. Not forgiveness for her, but comprehension that her choices were never yours to control. You don't miss the nights, the plans, the invitations, the imagined life. Those were never the foundation of who you were meant to be. Her friends? The ones who laughed, who turned your trust into a joke. You don't carry resentment toward them either. Their betrayal is theirs, not yours. Their downfall, their exposure, their petty cruelty, life handled it in its own way. You don't need to gloat. You don't need to relish it. That's not your story anymore. You feel peace. Not an untested, naive peace, but the kind forged in fire, the kind that comes from facing humiliation, heartbreak, and disbelief, and choosing yourself anyway. You carry it quietly in your chest, a steady pulse beneath your ribs, reminding you that surviving isn't the same as surrendering, and growth doesn't come without pain. You think about the nights you spent sleepless, replaying words, feeling shame sharper than anger, questioning your worth. You think about the long hours when you doubted yourself, wondered if staying meant failure, and realized that leaving was not weakness, but clarity. You realize now that those nights weren't wasted. They were lessons. They were a forge for the man you have become. You look directly at those who have been betrayed, laughed at, or humiliated, and you speak from the part of you that survived, the raw, honest part. You tell them this quietly but firmly. It is possible to lose someone and not lose yourself. It is possible to be made small by others and still stand taller than ever. It is possible to be disrespected, to feel broken, to be mocked, and yet reclaim every piece of your dignity without compromise. You remember the man who waited at home, who smiled at messages, who ignored instincts because love felt enough. You see the man who confronted, who questioned, who collapsed privately. You see the man who chose self-respect over closure, who walked away while everything and everyone around him tried to diminish him. And you recognize him now, not as yourself, but as the necessary step in the journey to becoming this. A man who trusts more carefully, but loves more deeply. A man who builds boundaries, enforces standards, and refuses to allow humiliation to define his worth. A man who doesn't need revenge, because he knows life has a way of balancing itself, and strength is quieter than malice. You carry the scars. You carry the memories. They are not weaknesses. They are proof. Proof that you endured, that you grew, that you walked through fire without losing the part of yourself that matters most. And now, looking at the horizon of your own life, you feel something profound, quiet confidence. Not the kind that comes from being untouched, unscarred, or untested, but the kind that comes from knowing exactly who you are, what you will accept, and what you will never surrender again. You didn't lose her. You didn't lose the life you thought you had. You found yourself, and the man you found is unshakable.